Ladies and gentlemen, we are extremely sparse today. I know that Don Cooley is not here for a reason. I know why he's not here. I know that Fred's out of town for the next few months, Fred D'Amato.
Yeah, right.
I don't know where Laura is.
Where's the
Or
Paulsons?
Barbara.
Laura's in Chicago.
Or Paulson.
Laura's in Chicago.
Or Dave Paulson.
Don't know where they are.
Well, they were at the hospital yesterday, but I don't know where they are today.
And I don't know where the Hunters are. Shay is still out of
I
town.
think she's
Yes.
coming. I think, yeah, Marge said, you just
You
can't,
feed the sheep that came.
don't come. She
Huh?
said it's
Yeah.
Feed the
ridiculous.
sheep
Yeah.
that came.
I
Yes,
said it's
yes,
ridiculous. She
that's
said he
the
doesn't
only
even
way
know
to
who
do
you
it.
are. He's in ICU anyway, so
That's
yeah.
why I didn't. I was planning on going yesterday, but then Barbara called me from the hospital and said, "Don't come."
No.
So I said, "Okay."
No, because she told me that yesterday morning at 7 when I first found out that he's in ICU. Well, you can't run around.
you can't go
Marge's
in.
ICU.
All
running
you can
around.
do is see the family.
Yeah, well.
But if it's not Marge
Sorry, yeah.
and Rod, then
Well,
we don't know
I'll
them.
tell you what, guys, we're late getting started here. It's already well after, so let's go ahead and begin. The thought for today is what do you do when it's hard to believe? And I think that's a particularly interesting topic because I know there have been times in my life where I've really seriously questioned about something that I thought I believed that I wasn't so sure anymore that that's what I believed. So I think we all have those kind of things. And the story, shall we call it a true story or a truth story? For today comes from Mark chapter 9 verses 14 through 29. And again, it's a very well-known story. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them, and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. "What are you arguing with them about?" he asked. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "O unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him, but if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," Jesus says, "everything is possible for him who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me with my unbelief."
Oh, I remember that.
When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the evil spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And of course, the boy is healed. What do you do when it's hard to believe? In what ways do you feel that your faith or the beliefs that you have get challenged?
I think when you're in a crisis or there's something going on with your family or people not in your family that you have a hard time to believe because you pray so hard for some conclusion to this and it doesn't happen. You think, there's no God. This isn't worth it, you know.
Yeah, that's one good time.
Another is,
And the reason is because you're not getting the answer that you want to your
That I
prayer,
want.
so you say,
Right.
well, then I'm not going to believe.
then that's it, you know.
That's probably the biggest.
Yeah.
And another is when you read old scriptures or old testimonies, I don't know what you call them, but old documents about Jesus and about what was the other thoughts at the time. You know, okay, do you believe this stuff or do you believe the Bible?
Right. And I think even sometimes with the Bible itself, you know, we are confronted with the fact that the Bible that we read has gone through a number of translations. It's gone through a number of alterations by scholars of the church that have, and we wonder sometimes whether what we're getting here is really what it meant to begin with. You know, in our class, we've gone back and researched back through a whole lot of stuff over the years, and we get a whole new understanding of what a parable means or of what Jesus is saying just by knowing more clearly what the political, economic, social, custom, religious situation was in that particular setting. So, you know, sometimes I even have doubts that what I'm reading in the scripture is really what it was meant to say or what it is meant to be. And I think there are lots of times when we get challenged. Sometimes we'll be watching a program on TV. Perhaps it's has to do with archaeology, or perhaps it has to do with other religions that go back in time and so on. And you go, ooh, that doesn't jive with what I think at all. Now, wait a minute, I got to think this through for a minute. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not too sure that that's right. Well, when we're challenged in that way, when we're wondering whether or not what we believe is the truth, is there anything you can do at that point? What should you do?
You pray.
Okay, yeah, you pray. You can't just say, oh, the heck with it, I'm not going to worry about it. You can pray. What else?
You have to decide on something.
Right. You can also involve yourself in discourse with fellow Christians
Right.
who are believers.
Mm-hmm.
Ask them how they feel, what they think. You can continue to study the scriptures yourself. There are a number of things you can do that I think, you know, can help you resolve the issue that's on your mind.
Or accept the fact that it ain't gonna go your way.
Or you can,
Go on. Explain.
Well,
I wanna hear it.
praying for an outcome that doesn't work out.
Oh, okay. All right. Right.
And in fact, sometimes there is no answer that you can recognize while you're alive.
That's true.
And therefore, you're nude, you're stripped of your beliefs there. Because, and even if you network with Christians and get viewpoints from them and everything else, you're still empty.
Well, there's a trap you can fall into, I think, and that is when you're doubting something that you believe, is to not pursue questioning, is to ignore an intellectual exercise, if you will, and try to pursue it. A lot of times people will not do that for only one reason. They're afraid that if they question, they'll find out that what they believe isn't true. Mm-hmm. But then, why would you want to believe something that isn't true? See what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of a little trap you can get caught in there. Well,
You see, you know, in the New Testament, it's ask and you shall receive. Well, when you don't receive anything that you recognize, those passages are meaningless. But if a Christian is committed to the Christian ideals, they say, okay, I got the answer, I just don't recognize it. Lord, help me recognize what your response is.
okay.
That's about as good as you can get.
Well, you're kind of sounding like the guy in the story right here.
where's Carol?
Which,
You know.
I'm here.
Hi, I'm
Good, hi.
made it.
I am too. I was beginning to think I wouldn't.
You know Richard, I think. Well, if you've ever wondered to yourself if it is wrong to have doubts, because some people actually believe it's wrong and sinful to doubt.
Not if you're a Methodist.
No, well, there are probably some Methodists that think that too, but particularly in more conservative traditions, I think that's true. But we wonder if it is sinful to raise questions about our faith. And if we do raise questions, are we taking the risk that what we believe could be in error, could be wrong? Barclay, who is the guy that I constantly use for our regular scripture studies, says that in his experience, there's two different kinds of people. He's got everybody lumped into two different groups. There's one group he calls natural believers. And these are the folks for whom belief just seems to be easy. They just believe. There's no big problem for them. Belief just comes really easy. But then he says there's another whole group of people who find it really hard to believe. Well, like the fellow in Mark chapter 9. And those kind of folks say, you know, Lord, I believe, I think, but then just help me with this. Well, yeah, I believe, but I don't know, but help me, you know, believe. There's also the great preacher, Dr. Leonard Griffith, who had something to say about doubt and about skeptical people too. And he said there's two different kinds of folks. He says, first of all, there's those folks who simply do not believe and they don't care. They just flat don't care. And he says there's really nothing much you can do for these folks unless their attitude changes, because they're just, that's it for them. They're set. He says not long ago at a well-known college, the campus newspaper offered a prize. They had a contest for whatever student could come up with the best definition of life. This is modern college-level students. Listen to some of these answers. Life is a bad joke which isn't even funny. Life is a disease for which the only cure is death. Life is a jail sentence which we get for the crime of being born.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Who wrote those?
College students.
Students in response to this contest. So Griffith says, you know what? There ain't much you can do for folks like this. I mean, you know, that kind of cynical, bitter skepticism is just, you can't do much. But he says that on the other hand, there are a lot of people who are called, what he calls, honest doubters. Okay? These are people who really want to believe, but in some instances they find it kind of hard to do it. And so you wonder what it is that you can say or what can you do for folks like this, because obviously they can be helped along somehow. Let's take a little bit closer look at the true or truth story here in Mark and see if we can't find an answer to some of these. Here you got a father who's worried sick over his son, who has for several years had these terrible seizures. He's rendered speechless, he's thrown to the ground, he foams at the mouth, grinds his teeth, and goes rigid. Well, we all know what that is.
Yeah.
A grand mal seizure. The child has been having these since birth. There have been occasions where it's almost killed him because he's fallen into the water or whatever the case may be. You can imagine a father's distraught condition, how concerned the father is about this. He's tried everything. He wants, of course, more than anything in the world to make his son well, and so he brings him to Jesus. And in the final analysis, he says, please help us if you can. And Jesus says, if you can. Jesus says, anything is possible to a person who believes. Well, then you take a look at the father's response. Look at the desperation. He cries out, I believe. Help me believe. You know, in other words, Lord, I'm believing as much as I can. But as hard as I try, it still isn't enough. You got to help me make up for my inadequate faith. I'm trying hard, but help me. And then as you remember, as we read in the story, Jesus goes ahead and heals the boy. Well, you can't help feeling bad for that father. Matter of fact, you can't help feeling bad for anybody in a similar kind of situation. And even more, you can't help feeling upset or distraught with yourself if you've ever been in a place in life where it's hard to believe. I'd like to make a personal comment of my own here, entirely away from James Moore. And when I'm through, you can respond and tell me if I've come close to what you think, or whether I'm out in left field, or whether you think I'm a complete idiot. That's okay, but I need a response. We should never, ever be afraid to challenge and question anything. At Grace Community Church years ago, I had a youth class, and the name of the class was Challengers. I tried to teach the kids, challenge everything. I tried to teach the kids, there's no way that your beliefs and your faith can be made strong if you don't challenge and question. If you just swallow it hook, line, and sinker without thinking about it, your beliefs are not worth the plug nickel. You have to question. After all, what we're doing here is we're seeking after the truth, are we not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, why would you want to continue believing in a falsehood only because you are afraid of what the truth might be? And there are churches, whole churches, that support that philosophy. There are churches that forbid their members to go see a certain movie, forbid them to read a certain book, and so on and so forth, because they're afraid that doing that will shake their parishioners' faith or beliefs. Well, if their faith and beliefs are that weak, they've got a problem to begin with, in my opinion.
Or the church has a problem with controlling.
Well, you know, me personally, I wouldn't want anything to do with a church like that, or a religion like
No.
that. And I think as Methodists, we're encouraged in our tradition as Methodists, we're encouraged to question and to use our intellect. On top of that, Jesus said one time, I am the truth. So why should we not continue during our life's journey to constantly seek the truth? I would not want anything to do with that kind of a church, because a lot of times those are the churches that say to their people, here is what you are to believe.
Right.
Don't question it, swallow it, and live with it, and don't go anywhere or do anything that rubs it. You know, that is a real red flag to me, a really warning. So that's my own personal opinion. What do you think?
Oh, I agree.
You agree?
That's
You
why I
always
had
agree
her-
with me, and it makes me mad. Disagree with me once.
Carol wanted to say
I
something.
just said that's why I had such a hard time in the Baptist church growing up, and it drove my mother crazy because my grandma got thrown out of the church for going to a dance. Well, I didn't know that. I was at school, and this kid came up and said, "Did you know your grandma got thrown out of the church?" I said, "She did." Why? You know?
Good for her.
So I went home and asked my mother, and she said, well, she was seen at a dance, and I said, well, who saw her there? And mother said, well, that's not important. And I said, that's the most important thing of all. If somebody saw her there, they were there too.
Right, yeah.
They never thought of it, I guess.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, I just, I have a real problem with people who are, I don't know whether you call it putting blinders on, or whether you call it tunnel vision, or whether you call it fear. I don't know what all the motivations are behind it, but the minute you refuse to challenge and question and analyze and think, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. And I know for a fact that John Wesley said one time, you got to use your brain as well as your heart. Think, for heaven's sakes. And one of the main tenets of our Methodist faith is to use your logical thinking.
Well, it's experience and reason.
That's correct.
Scripture, tradition of the church, experience, reason.
Good
That's-
Methodist over here. Thumbs up on that one.
Well, that's why I think Methodists are squared away, because if you continue to remember that, then you're actually, you're in a plumb position. You're not skewed one way or another. You're always doing that.
Well,
I mean, the Methodists say, start thinking about this stuff.
I had a debate with somebody not too long ago that I work with, who is much more conservative Christian than I am. They go to, I think they said they attend a Calvary Baptist.
Not the one here in Buller, I hope.
Hmm? No. And I was telling him, I said, you know, my Methodist church has a whole series of stands on issues. And I said, I totally disagree with some of them. He said, well, how can you belong to the church if you disagree with those kind of things? I said, because I don't have to agree with everything the church says. Some of those things I just don't agree with. So big deal. I should throw the whole church and my whole faith in the gutter just because I don't believe on a couple of issues that the church stands for? It's all right to question and disagree and doubt. Well, James Moore says that there are 5 things that we got to remind ourselves of when we're confronted with doubt. When we're not too sure about something, there's 5 things we need to think of. Number 1, remember this, he says, your beliefs will always be challenged. Always, as long as you live. We cannot permit ourselves to be so insecure that we become all shook up and rattled every time there's some confusion or some debate. And as a matter of fact, if you want to know the truth, some of these confusing issues and questions and debates that challenge us can actually be stepping stones to our own spiritual growth and strength. If nothing else, they can give us time to think through our beliefs more soundly. So we should never be afraid of that, because we can actually grow and mature by going through those kind of doubts. And sometimes challenges to our beliefs like this we also need to consider can be very painful. But James Moore says, growing pains are an inevitable part of maturing, even spiritual maturing. So sometimes you got to go through something that hurts a little bit in order for you to come out the other end. And I think Wesley would agree. God gave us minds. Surely we are expected to use them, not turn them off. I would seriously doubt whether there's a single mature Christian anywhere who has not at some point raised questions about their faith and attempted to find answers. I can't believe that there would be a mature Christian anywhere in any church in any way that wouldn't have tried that or done that at least once.
Brian, you may remember that some years ago, after Mother Teresa died, her diaries were found, and there was a whole bunch of controversy. Here's this great saint in the world, and yet her diaries were filled with doubt, and so people who don't understand that just jumped on her and say, how can she be a saint?
She's a phony. She's a phony. You know, she didn't believe this stuff. That's right. They do not understand where it's coming from.
And the mystics themselves say that as we deepen in our faith, we experience what is called the dark night of the soul, dark night of the spirit, or the dark night of your identity, and then the dark night of the soul, where utter abandonment of God. I have lost everything, including God, which is what I saw in Mother Teresa's writings. As a great mystic, she was entering into that dark night of even feeling that God is not anywhere.
Mm-hmm. But we know that God always is there. Yeah, I fully agree, and I think any Christian person has experienced similar kinds of things. James Moore says that he has a friend of his who is a minister who intentionally listens to a radio preacher with whom he completely and totally disagrees. He said they are at absolute opposite ends of the spectrum theologically. Their whole approach to faith is completely different, but he listens to this preacher that he disagrees with as a, quote, discipline in thinking. Asking himself as he listens, why do I see things so differently? Why is my approach to my faith so different than him? And he says, in so doing, this helps him a great deal in forming new insights into his own Christian faith. See? So, our faith should not be a reason to stifle our questions. Likewise, our questions should not be a reason to stifle our faith. You know, both can be the means by which our faith can deepen and grow and mature. Second, he says, remember the people you know who believe. There's a huge number of the most fulfilled, productive, creative, joyous people through history have been believers. Want to know some of them? See if you recognize any of these folks. Abraham, Moses, David, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Peter, Paul, Luther, Calvin, Wesley, Francis of Assisi, Mother Teresa, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Werner von Braun, Albert Schweitzer, and oh yeah, Jesus of Nazareth. This is a very reassuring company of people to be hooked up to when you have doubts or questions. It might just be a good idea, he says, to stand with all of these folks, and incidentally with Jesus. Third, when it's hard to believe, remember the church. Remember what the church is, remember what it stands for, remember what it represents. Sure, the church has weaknesses, right? Even our church has weaknesses, but it's the best force for good in the world we have. And remember our own church family. Remember all the great folks that we have here in our congregation, of which there are one or two present. Fourth, remember that doubts about non-essential matters can blind us to really essential things. In other words, some people focus on and worry about things that don't matter worth a hoot. And in doing that, they miss the things that matter a whole lot. Want some examples?
Sure.
Thank you.
You sound so
What,
excited.
what difference does it make what the dimensions of heaven are? Or where heaven is located? What difference does it make what the streets of heaven are paved with, or if there even are streets? Who cares what the temperature of hell is?
We might care someday.
Who cares what color the hymn book is? You know, people get totally obsessed with these little things until their entire thought process is totally obsessed and focused on this thing, and the really important stuff just is gone. It just goes to waste. And then fifth and finally, he says, when it's hard to believe, remember that faith is confirmed and faith is proven by living it. Okay? Faith becomes strengthened by practicing it, like anything else. You want to be good at the piano, you got to practice. Want to be good at basketball, you got to practice. Want to be good as a Bible teacher, you got to practice. Sorry.
You're very good, Brian.
Oh, come on now.
Lots of practice.
Faith becomes strengthened by practicing it. Faith weakens when it's ignored. And he ends this thought for today by saying this. Jesus did not say, memorize these doctrines. Jesus said, follow me. That's it. So, next week we will start with talking a good game is not enough.
Tell that to Bobby Hawk.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian.
It's time you bit the dust.
He's